one way of deeper understanding the current ecological disruption and crisis is to understand the various dimensions of this crisis in terms of three different phases. The first phase, of course, is the environmental crisis that we see in the massive loss of biodiversity, in the climate chaos, the symptoms of climate chaos that we see taking shape around the world, and so forth. The second phase, the second dimension of the current ecological crisis shows up in terms of a social divide that we see manifest in the symptoms of shocking levels of inequality that amplified in great ways over the past 4 decades, and in the phenomenon that societies that used to hang together begin to fall into pieces, into tribes that fight each other and that lose the capacity to connect with each other across these boundaries. If we look at these two dimensions, the environmental and the social divide, we can say that those two phases or dimensions of the current crisis emerge from a disconnect between self and nature, the environmental crisis, and self and other, the social economic crisis. But then there is a third phase, a third dimension of the current crisis, and that's the spiritual divide, the spiritual crisis we are in. And that arises from a disconnect between self and self, between who I am today and who I could be tomorrow. And if these two aspects of myself are disconnected, what does that look like, feel like? I feel loss of energy. I feel maybe symptoms of burnout, symptoms of anxiety disorder or depression, and in extreme cases, even risk for suicide. All of which are phenomena and symptoms that are greatly amplified over the past years, more or less proportional with the use of social media like Facebook. So if we step back and look at the larger picture, the three divides, the environmental, the social, and the spiritual divide as the three phases of the ecological crisis today, what do we see? We see that collectively, we as a human species create results that nobody wants. We create the environmental divide, the social divide, the spiritual divide. No one stands up in the morning, looks into the mirror and says, and today I'm going to destroy more of our planet, more of our society, kind of our deeper foundations of society, and I will make other people and myself more unhappy. No one is actually doing that. Yet that is exactly what we do on a collective level. We collectively create results that nobody or almost nobody wants. So what have we learned? I think if we have learned anything in dealing with these issues is what does not work, which is if you address these issues one by one. Here in Ministry for Environment, there in Ministry for the social issues, and so on and so forth. That's not working. What we need instead is an approach that looks at the interdependency of all of these three dimensions of the current ecological crisis and applies a systems thinking based approach, by which we mean an approach that's not just reacting against the symptoms, but understanding and addressing the deeper root issues. So what is the essence of such a systems thinking based approach? I have spent the past 2 decades in further developing these approaches to something that today is called awareness-based systems change. And the essence in many experiments and many practical examples. And the essence of that approach to systems change is this, that you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. You cannot change a system unless you transform the mindset of the people who enact that system. Because if you don't, the same people in a new structure will just enact the same problems. And secondly, that to do that, we need new methods and tools that make the system sense and see itself. That's something we know kind of personally, right? If you or I go through a period of transformational change, through a period of behavioral change, we need a coach. We need somebody who is listening to us, who is mirroring back. But that's exactly what we don't have at the level of whole systems. So we need new methods and tools that make, on the level of whole systems, make the system sense and see itself. And to make that happen, we need new infrastructures that facilitate such processes. So in closing, I would say that when you look at the bigger picture, we know we are at the decade of transformation where a lot of transformation needs to happen. Kind of this is the decade that will decide the future. But what we don't have is, so we have that decade, we have that need for transformation, but what we don't have is the capacity to lead these transformations. So we need to build that capacity, that transformation literacy, if you want, and we need to democratize the access to that transformation literacy. And that, I believe, is one of the biggest leverage points today, something that I'm dedicating the remaining years of my life to, and that the Presencing Institute, in collaboration with the United Nations and many other institutions, is trying to bring into reality over the next years.
Hello, I'm Howard Gardner, and I'm speaking to you from Cambridge, Massachusetts, the home of Harvard University, with which I will soon have been affiliated for 60 years. I'm trained as a developmental psychologist, and I've spent much of my time in education, both as a teacher and as a researcher. I'd like to touch on my two major lines of work, how they might be connected, and how they might be helpful in addressing issues of sustainability. 40 years ago, I developed the idea of multiple intelligences. This is a well-known idea now, where I argue that human beings, instead of having a single intelligence and a single computer in our mind, instead contain a number of 7 or 10 different computers, which I call the multiple intelligences. So we have linguistic computers, musical computers, spatial computers, computers for understanding other people, and so on. The idea of multiple intelligences has caught on in education. There have been many good uses in schools all around the world, but it's also been used destructively. For example, some people have tried to argue that different racial and ethnic groups have different profiles of intelligences. There's no evidence for this, and in fact, it's a very destructive idea. It involves stereotyping. The misuses of my ideas got me to focus on what it means to do good work and to be a good citizenship. How to use your talents in ways that are good for the world. To understand this, you need to understand that intelligences are value neutral. You can use any intelligence for a benign purpose or a malignant purpose. Let's take linguistic intelligence. The German poet Goethe and the German propagandist Goebbels both had lots of linguistic intelligence. Goethe used it to write great works of art. Goebbels used it to generate hatred and to promote genocide. Well, let's take interpersonal intelligence, understanding of other people. Nelson Mandela, the South African leader, used his interpersonal intelligence to bring warring parties closer together in South Africa. Slobodan Milosevic, the Serbian leader, used his interpersonal intelligence to promote hatred and genocide in the former Yugoslavia. So you have the same intelligence as linguistic or interpersonal social intelligence used either constructively or destructively. So how does this affect all of us when we think about big issues like sustainability? We should ask ourselves, what are our areas of strength? Are you good in language, in mathematics, in the arts, in leadership, in working in organizations, in playing athletics? What is your area of strength? And then how can you use this area positively, pro-socially, for the wider good, to do good work and to be a good citizen? So, thinking about the area of sustainability, what it is that you want to promote in the world, what kind of action, what kind of policy, or what kind of good deeds do you want with respect to our environment, with respect to climate change, to respect to production of food, and then think about how you can use your strengths to do good, to talk with others, to start organizations, to cooperate with others, to try things out, to get honest feedback, and then on the basis of that feedback, try again. We can't all be Greta Thunberg, the amazing Swedish young person who has done so much for raising consciousness about sustainability. It's claimed that Greta Thunberg has autism. That means in many ways she's not able to understand other people the way most of us can, and yet she's been able to use her own profile of intelligences to generate good work and good citizenship around the world. We can all learn from the example and from the inspiration of Greta Thunberg. Thank you very much for your attention and all the best in your good work.